Good morning and welcome to KETIV AVA. I'm your host, Nicole Morris. I'm the Customer Experience Manager here at KETIV. Also with us, Jorge Fernandez, who is a KETIV subject matter expert on Vault and Job Processor. So our presentation today on the Job Processor for Vault is actually going to be by Allan O'Leary, who's the Product Manager at Autodesk for PLM and Vault. So Allan, you want to give us a little bit more about your background today?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. So, as Nicole mentioned, I'm one of the product managers on the Vault team here, based out of San Francisco. I've been with the Autodesk and the Vault team my entire career here for around 8 years, focused on the delivery of professional and workgroup products. So pleased to be here today and to impart some of my knowledge, hopefully, to you guys on the job processor.
Excellent. Well, we're glad to have you today. So can you explain a little bit why you chose this subject as your subject for discussion today?
Yeah, certainly. I think job processor from our perspective is one of our more powerful tools, and certainly one of our more misunderstood tools. You know, we certainly get a lot of information or requests coming from support and from the field about the use and implementation of job processor. So I think today hopefully we're going to cover over some of those questions, get ahead of the curve a little bit, and teach you guys a little bit about what the job processor is, why it is you should care about the job processor, and of course how it actually works in practice. So we'll start off, as I mentioned here, a little bit about what the job processor is. So essentially this is a Vault client component which is used to automate some repetitive task that the user would otherwise be carrying out on their machine. So for anyone out there with workgroup and professional, you already have access to the job processor. Its primary role is to create visualization files and update properties, but it can do some other, it does have some other specific tasks it can carry out, and you can in fact build your own tasks to be run by the job processor. That gets us a little bit into why you should care about the job processor. So for those of you out there who are end users, this is a nice little efficiency booster. So when you're doing large Vault data loading, we can actually use the job processor to create all the DWF files. So we're not sitting around waiting for the local application to create the DWF and check it in with the file as it gets loaded. And this can be a considerable amount of time if we're dealing with large volumes of data, and it obviously ties up your machine, so you can't be doing much else. So that plays into our second one here as well. Even if it's not just large data loading and you're doing just a simple check-in of an assembly, we can save you a lot of time by offloading that publishing job to the job processor. So on check-in, you can opt to say, I just want to send this with creation to the job processor. As soon as you click OK, the check-in completes and you can go on and do some other task on your machine. So it frees up a lot more free time for drinking coffee and eating donuts. The other thing it allows us to do is get around some of these other nasty manual tasks like synchronizing properties. So that's that's really our first goal here, is to free up some time for the end user and speed up the process of getting data into Vault. The second part of this, though, is it does enable some much more powerful processes. So there are a few things inside the Vault ecosystem that we can't do unless you have job processor. So the first process task here is basically ensuring that customers have the correct document view and properties when they need it. So this would be a situation where we would typically tie a job processor task to a lifecycle state change. So if we release a file, we would say create a job to update all the properties on this released file. And that could be synchronizing revision, it could be putting back some lifecycle state, and then create the latest version of the DWF file, so we've got the correct visualization, and then release this to people downstream. So it enables some process there. Also part of this, updating the revision table. So the job processor can actually go in and automatically in the background update your revision table with the latest information when it's released. When we get into the Revit side of the world, we can generate some 2D sheets from Revit. So this is a little bit different to the standard AutoCAD or Inventor Visualization DWF, this is where we're actually going to dig into a Revit file, extract all the sheets, and attach them as external references to the Revit model. So again, a very powerful process enabler there. And finally, out of the box, if you guys are using Project Sync with Buzzsaw, the job processor is actually used as the queue to upload and download documents from Vault into your Buzzsaw instance. So for anyone with Vault Professional out there, you do already have an entitlement to Buzzsaw that comes with Vault Professional, and you can download and start synchronizing files using the job processor between Vault and your Buzzsaw account. The final thing we can start to do with the job processor, and why you should care about it, is creating custom jobs. Now, I would say probably the most popular custom job we have going around today is PDF creation. So if you've ever been up to our Vault App Store, you'll see there's probably 3 or 4 applications up there that use job processor or some other method to create PDF. And our consulting team also has capabilities built on top of the job processor to create PDF. But you know, we certainly, if we're using the SolidWorks integration for Vault, we can leverage SolidWorks and the job processor to create DWF files in that instance. Really, you know, consuming our open API, you guys can build all manner of custom jobs and have them queued up in the job processor. So that's a little bit about you know, why you would want to use the job processor. But let's dig in now and have a look at what actually makes it up. So I suppose all in all, there's really 3 phases to the job processor. Over on the far left-hand side here, we can see we've got methods to actually create a job. So those methods we touched on briefly during the Why You Should Care section is, say, a job generated by a lifecycle state change, a job that's generated by you know, Inventor or AutoCAD interaction. It could also be a Vault action to update a view in either the thick client or the thin client. So there's a number of ways we can actually start to generate these jobs. Once the job is generated, it goes and it sits in a job queue. The job queue is essentially a list of all the jobs that are coming into a particular server. And then on the far right-hand side, we actually have a job processor, which is a client that will go in and start to retrieve those jobs from the job queue and carry them out. So this job processor on the far right-hand side takes the job of an end user sitting there doing these repetitive tasks. It's configured with the right software, perhaps configured to start at certain times of day or on startup, and it'll just go and start working through any of the tasks which have been assigned to the job queue. So that's I want to, of course, click down onto each of these cycles here and have a look at a couple of the quick examples you're going to see when we start to deal with the job processor. So the first thing we probably want to have a look at is how we actually go and create those jobs. So high level view, create a job on check-in, create a job during the life cycle state change, create a job when we're using autoloader, we can create a job when we're updating view in the thick and thin clients, and we can create a job when we're doing the Buzzsaw sync. And you'll see there we've got a couple of images there. We're going to dive into the software at the moment and have a look at this in real time. But once we've actually created those jobs, they're going to go into the job queue. So just to give you a quick introduction to the job queue here, this is a server-based component that accepts and queries jobs coming in from the client machines. So basically we end up with a list of jobs and information about their status, when they were submitted, who submitted them, and what job processor has them reserved, for example. So your first step in actually working with job processor is you have to go and enable this on the server that you have configured on your site. And you can then start to access a view of this queue from the client. So with that, we might jump in and have a look at a little bit of software and some of the examples. So first one here, you can see I'm inside an Inventor model, and I have some files checked out here. I'm going to go do a quick check-in. You'll see at the moment on my check-in settings, I don't have DWF enabled. I might have switched this off because it's a very large assembly. It takes a long time to generate DWF files. It could be a number of options there. But if I go into the settings here, you can see I can actually choose to create the DWF or the visualization during check-in, which is the default, or I can send this to the job server. So this option here is going to obviously place a job in the queue to create visualization files for everything that's being checked in here. Okay, and we can choose to apply to all files. I'm going to select OK. We'll select OK here. You'll see during the check-in process that happens pretty quickly because we're not generating any DWF files locally and we're not attaching those to any models. All right. So we'll close down Inventor now and we'll switch across to the Vault Explorer. So some of the other methods we have here to create jobs is of course through the life cycle state changes. Now in here I'm going to go and have a look first of all at my global settings, and the first thing you'll notice here under global settings, this is where I actually enable my job server. So this is the first step in actually turning on job processors. We have to make sure that it's enabled for the site. Okay. Once it's enabled though, I can go into my admin, to my Vault settings here, and we'll choose a lifecycle scheme. So underneath the flex lifecycle process here, I'm going to go down into my transition area. And one of the best examples here is probably when we're working from work in progress to the release state. So I'm going to edit the transitions. You can see we've got some criteria. The properties need to be filled out correctly. We've got, usually have some security here around who can do the action. But here are the actual actions that are going to take place when we move from work in progress to released. So the second option here, you can see I can either choose to update some properties using the job server, or I can actually update the properties and create a DWF using the job server. Okay, so what that means is if I go in and I change something from work in progress to released, there's going to be a new job created to synchronize properties and to create a new DWF file. So we'll close that all down. I'll go down to my designs folder here. We'll go to the padlock, and let's grab something simple like the catch assembly. Oh, grab a. So I'm going to first of all synchronize the properties for that one. So you can see there, can't release until all my properties are synchronized. We'll say OK to that. Very good. We've updated some properties, but you can see now when I've synchronized properties, I've lost my view of that, my DWF view of that file because we've created a new version. So in here, when I now go and do my change state, we'll put it back into released. Okay, that's now released correctly, and we've added a job to the queue that's going to update the properties in the file, and it's going to create a new visualization file for that one. Okay, if we go and look at some other examples, some other real simple examples here for how this is intended to work, you'll see I've got, say, my padlock IDW. At the moment, there is no DWF view here, and you can see that it tells me I need to click Open if I want to view this. Now I have the ability to update this on the local machine here just by clicking Update, or I can select to Queue Update. All right. If there's more than one file that's being impacted here, you can see I can grab a couple of files, and underneath the Actions menu, I can Update View, and I can queue the update for a number of files. So this is a nice quick way to update the view for more than one file if they're missing their DWF file, components. So that's how I can create my jobs. You can see there we've got a number of ways. So on check-in, lifecycle transition, and by right-clicking and queuing the update. But how do we know that anything has actually happened there? Well, if we go up here to the Tools menu, you can see I've got a job queue. And clicking that, I can now see all these jobs which have just been entered into the queue. So we've got my combo assembly IAM that was created during the check-in. I've got the additional IDW files that I added manually by doing the queue update. And you can see there's my action for that synchronize properties on the case outer IPT file. Okay, so that's going to it's going to carry out that task of synchronized properties, and you'll see that it's got a different priority to the others. Always, we need to synchronize the properties before we create the view of that file, so it gets a different priority value there. But if we look through the rest of the properties, again, this is a configurable grid inside of the view here. So each job gets its own unique ID. It gets a priority. I can see the status, and you can see at the moment it just tells me it's pending. What that means is there's nothing at the moment being done. It gives me a description of the job, and you can see here the prefix is indicating that these ones are creating DWFs, and this one here is synchronizing properties. I have a submission date, so when was this thing actually logged? And this is going to be important for figuring out if we've got an error. If something's been sitting there for an extended period of time. I know who submitted the job. That's the end user. And here the job processor will tell me which machine, if we have more than one, has reserved to do this job. And we can have more than one job processor. We get a result here. We've got a start time. There's the job type and the vault that this is being carried out on. So there's a whole bunch of information in this queue to help us understand when things are due to happen and in what order and who's submitting these jobs. At the top here along the menu bar, we have a filter. So if we've got a list of, say, more than 1,000 jobs because we've just overloaded the job processor or it hasn't been running, I can come in here and look at what future jobs are actually in the queue. I can remove jobs here. I can resubmit jobs if they have failed and I've fixed a problem. I can basically reset the queue, which will take a job away from a processor and put it back into the queue. I can print this view, and I can take site ownership. So if I'm going to take a server down or there's a server offline, I can take ownership away from that server so other job processors can carry out that task. Okay. And you'll see as we click on each of these jobs in the queue, it updates down the bottom here to indicate what the current status of that job is. But at the moment, there's nothing happening. So let's talk a little bit about why nothing is happening. And this is where we get into the job processor. And this is, for many people, this is the complicated bit. So the job processor is actually the machine that does the job. The job processor does not live on the server. It's actually a client-side application, and you'll see it gets installed with your Vault client. It's one of the options to install. We've actually made it optional so you can turn it off, but by default this will install on all the client machines, and you do require, obviously, a Vault client installation to run this. By default, it's going to look at what applications there are on that client machine, and it's going to enable the jobs that machine can do based on the software that it finds. So as we sort of discussed along the way, primary tasks is creating DWF and synchronizing properties, on check-in, via autoloader, queuing updates, things like that. Okay. So what are the requirements for the job processor? So really, this should be a fairly well spec'd out workstation. We want to have, basically a CAD user style workstation for this thing to run on. It should run on a desktop operating system. Again, it's not a server application. In the background, it's going to be using Inventor and some other CAD applications to do this work. So, they are typically not supported on server operating systems. And as it's a Vault client, it does use a license, but it only uses that license while it's executing a job. So it'll release it back to the pool once the job is finished. Okay. So you need to install any CAD applications which are required to complete the jobs, and these things too are going to consume a license just during that phase of running the jobs. So here is a little quick overview, and this is available on our help site as well. Here's what we actually use when we're running those jobs. So for DWF creation of IPT, IM, IDW, IPN, and inventor drawings, we need Inventor. For AutoCAD, we can get away with TrueView. For the Revit stuff, obviously we need Revit, but for many of these other applications, the job processor, as long as it has the Vault client, will run OK synchronizing properties. Some of the older Office documents do require Microsoft Office. Okay, so we need Vault client, we need job processor installed, and in some cases, Inventor and Revit installed as well. Okay. In terms of across sites, we do have you know, the requirement to run a job processor if you have on each site, if you have multiple sites. This is to get around issues with site ownership of different files, and of course there is a performance aspect to this as well. We want local machines to be taking the jobs and doing those jobs on each of the local sites. Okay, so we shouldn't be downloading and running jobs from sites across the other side of the world. It's just not efficient. But let's real quick take a look at what the job processor actually does, and we'll have a look at an example again. So once the job processor is turned on, it goes and it checks the job queue on the server, and that's that list that we just looked at, every 10 minutes. This is configurable. We can make it happen more often or less frequently depending on what your demand is. If there is an item in the queue that it can do, it'll reserve that, and it'll taking the priority into account. It'll get those files for its to carry out the task on that machine, on that processor. It'll then download the file to the local machine. It'll open up the file. Usually it does this without requiring the application to be opened. So we'll use some headless version of the product to carry out the tasks. If it requires the file properties to be updated, it'll do this. It'll update the properties and it'll create a new version of the file. If a DWF is required, it's going to open up, create that version of the DWF onto the local drive. It's then going to check it into Vault and attach them, the DWF and the source file together. Okay, so creating a DWF doesn't generate a new version, but synchronizing properties does. It then goes and moves to the next job. So whilever there's a lot of jobs in the queue, we'll actually keep the CAD application open and running. By default, it'll complete 100 tasks in Inventor before it restarts Inventor, and that's just a performance control. But you can also decide how many jobs it should do before the CAD application closes down. But let's go and have a look at a real quick example. So we'll go back to my desktop here, and you'll see underneath programs, we'll go to the job processor for 2016, and you can see this little window comes up, and straight away it's found a job that was sitting in that queue. It's going to go and create an IDW for the catch assembly. You can see there's the processing start time. Here's who I'm logged in as the administrator, and it's running on the it's logged into the local host server. Okay, now the user we log in as should have permission to edit release files, because we are going to be updating properties for release files, and typically we would create a specific job processor user, but you could probably also use administrator for this action. Okay, so you can see it's now completed that first job and it's moved to the second and the third jobs. It's just chewing through these jobs now. It's opening those CAD applications in the background and completing the tasks and checking the files back in. If I go and have a look at some of the administrative controls here, you can see I can actually set job processor to start automatically every time I turn on, this machine turns on. And usually if you've got a purpose-built job processing machine, that's the best way to go. In terms of the settings, here's how I control who's logged into Job Processor. Windows authentication here if I need to. Okay, and here is the list of job types. So the job types depend on what is installed on the local machine. I don't have Revit installed, so none of these Revit tasks can be enabled. But if there's certain things I don't want to do, I don't want this machine to update revision block, for example, I can come in here and start to disable some of these jobs. Likewise, if I have a custom job, the custom job will appear in this list of job types here. Okay, so there's this at very least gives you a nice view into what your local job processor is actually going to do. And again, if there's a job to create RVT files, this machine will not pick up that job because it doesn't have the ability to do it. Okay, that's it. I'll resume that task, and you see it goes back to working on the job. And now it's finished and it's gone back to idle. So when I close this, you'll see the job processor lives down here in my browser. So I can click down here and bring back up that job processor view. If I go back to my queue, I can reset that. You can see there's one job which hasn't been completed yet, which is just to synchronize there was an error on that one because the admin didn't have access to it. So in here, this gives us our little troubleshooting as well. I can come down here and see underneath the results what the error was, if there was any errors. What I would typically do is I would now fix the error by giving the admin the ability to do it and resubmit the task. That is about it. That is a crash course, just enough information to get you dangerous with the job processor. Guys, are there any questions on the phone?
Hi, thanks, Alan. That was great. Yeah, we do have a few questions that came in. Is there an internal way to do AutoCAD files also with the job processor? This comes from George.
Yes, I didn't show an AutoCAD example today, but essentially AutoCAD has all those same options. You can check in and create DWIF on the job processor, create a DWIF on lifecycle state change and auto load. So yes, AutoCAD will work the same. And you do not need AutoCAD installed on the job processor. The TrueView, which gets installed with your Vault client, should be enough to do the AutoCAD tasks.
Okay, excellent. So the job processor, is that in Vault Workgroup as well?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any way to get a file unstuck from the queue? Like a file stuck in there seems to be taking an extra long time. Is there a way to get that moving?
It depends. We'll need to go, there might be some troubleshooting required there, whether or not we have to stop the job processor task and go in and actually carry out the task on that file manually to see what the issue is. I know sometimes it might be a long time downloading very large files, for example. Maybe we just need to go to the job processor and restart the CAD application or restart the job processor to clear up the memory.
Okay.
So, and that's a real quick little point here. I'd probably like to make. A lot of people ask, should this be installed on an end user's machine, someone who's a CAD user's machine, and typically not. If you're going to be doing any sort of heavy job processing, this is going to upset the client's day-to-day work. It's going to open Inventor in the background or AutoCAD in the background. It might change the Inventor project file, and it's going to use up a whole bunch of memory. So I strongly suggest if you're serious about job processor, implementing in production, it should have a purpose-built machine to avoid some of these issues. Certainly, if you guys want to just do some testing, some real quick tests, then I would say, put it on a CAD user's machine while they're not using it, or start it up overnight, for example. But during the day, you shouldn't be interrupting the CAD user running processes in the background.
Okay, great. I have another one from Mark. Will the job processor wait if no client or CAD licenses are available?
Yes. Yeah, it'll stay reserved on that machine until it can get a license.
So it does require its own license when it runs.
So when Job Processor runs, it will pull a license from the server, and if it's going to open up Inventor or Revit to do the action, it'll pull a license for those as well.
Okay. Okay. Do you have to be administrator to run the job queue?
Yes, so the administrative level permissions are needed to mess around with the queue and with the enablement.
Okay. To send them to the queue or to
No, not to send them to the queue, but to manage that queue.
I see. I see.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was actually
Yeah.
a question for
Yeah.
me.
Any end user can submit a job as long as they are entitled to change a state or they're entitled to check a file in. Yeah, that will be able to create a job, and even down to thin client users who typically have no permission whatsoever. We can still enable them to update a view on the job processor.
Okay, we have a request from Vincent. Could you show one more time how to enable the job queue in the job processor?
Certainly. So underneath Tools and Administration, Global Settings. So you can see under Global Settings, this is where we get access to the security, the change order settings, and there's our integrations. So enabling job server there. This can also be done from ADMS, but obviously it's easier to do it from the client.
Great presentation. I think it's a great high-level view of the job processor. Okay.
So I believe you guys have another couple of upcoming topics, which are less exciting than mine.
Yeah,
A couple of adventure topics.
Yeah. So assembly design visibility, we're going to show, understand how design view reps work and how positional reps work and how you can document multiple positions in your assembly. So that's going to be next week. Then after that, we have So What's New intro with Lauren Welch, who's our Autodesk product manager for Inventor. So those are some great topics that are coming up. So okay, so make sure you check out our Facebook page. This is a great way to get a lot of information. You can subscribe to that and be part of that. Some other great ways to get them, our YouTube blog, all our videos are posted up there as well. So make sure that you chime into those things.
And I would say also, as a next step for everybody, go ahead and start trying it out. You do have access to it if you have Vault Worker Professional. You can follow along with the video for how to enable it and get it going, of course. And always feel free to reach out to us if you need some more help as well on making sure you got it set up and everything as well, too.
Very good. Well, thank you, Allan, for joining us. We look forward to working with you again in the future.
Thanks very much.
Thank you all.